He left his bank card behind after paying for a sick elderly woman's medication and rushed away before she could even say, "Thank you." 1 hour later,
Sir, I'm sorry. Your card has been declined.
That can't be right. Please, try it again.
the machine beeped. Declined. The cashier looked at him apologetically.
I'm sorry, sir. Do you have another card?
Julian checked his pockets. His expression changed.
No.
The diner fell silent. Then a gentle voice spoke behind him.
I'll pay for his breakfast.
He turned. A young woman stepped forward, placed her card on the counter, and smiled.
It's only breakfast.
You don't even know me.
I don't have to.
Before he could thank her, she was already walking away. He didn't even know her name, but he already knew. He had to find her again. 1 hour earlier, Julian Mercer had exactly 11 minutes before the most important board meeting of the year. His driver was already waiting. His assistant had called twice. Every second mattered. He should have walked straight into his car. Instead, his attention was drawn to an elderly woman standing quietly at the pharmacy counter. She looked to be in her 70s. Her hands trembled as she counted the few crumpled bills and loose coins in her palm. The pharmacist offered her a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're still $4 short." The woman lowered her head. "I understand. I'll come back when I have enough." She slowly reached for her prescription, trying to hide the disappointment in her eyes. Julian stepped forward. "Please don't put it back." Both of them turned to look at him. He placed his bank card on the counter. "Whatever she needs. Pay for all of it." The pharmacist blinked. "Sir, are you sure?" Julian nodded. "And if there's anything else she might need for the week, add that too." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears. "Young man, I can't let you do this." Julian smiled gently. "You're not asking. I'm offering." Before she could say another word, his phone began ringing. His assistant. The board meeting. Julian answered the call as he hurried toward the door. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Without another thought, he rushed out of the pharmacy, never realizing his bank card was still lying on the pharmacist's counter. By the time Julian Mercer stepped into the boardroom, every seat around the long walnut table was already occupied. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward him, some impatient, some relieved. His assistant quietly slid a folder in front of him. "They've been waiting for you." Julian gave a brief nod. "Let's begin." For the next 2 hours, the room was filled with numbers, projections, and disagreements. One director wanted to cut funding for community outreach to increase profits. Another argued they should delay expansion until the following year. The discussion grew louder with every passing minute. Julian listened without interrupting. When everyone had finished speaking, he finally leaned forward. "If becoming more profitable means forgetting the people who helped build this company," he said calmly, "then we're chasing the wrong kind of success." The room fell silent. No one argued after that. The meeting ended with a unanimous vote. As the directors gathered their files, one of them smiled. "I don't know how you do it, Julian. You always make the hardest decisions sound easy." Julian returned the smile. "They're never easy. They're just necessary." A few minutes later, he walked out of the building with his tie slightly loosened. His driver opened the car door. "Back to the office, sir." Julian looked out the window for a moment before shaking his head. "No. I need coffee first. And somewhere quiet." His driver nodded and pulled away from the busy financial district. Neither of them noticed that the bank card Julian had used at the pharmacy was still sitting on the pharmacist's counter. A few minutes later, the car stopped in front of a small neighborhood diner. Julian thanked his driver, stepped out alone, and walked toward the front door. The little bell above it chimed softly as he walked inside. Julian glanced around the small neighborhood diner before taking a seat at the counter. It was quiet, simple. Exactly the kind of place he came to when he wanted to disappear from the business world for a little while. "Just a black coffee, please," he said. As the cashier prepared his order, Julian let out a slow breath. The board meeting was finally over. For the first time all morning, his mind was beginning to settle. A few minutes later, the cashier placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. "That'll be $4, sir." Without giving it much thought, Julian reached into his wallet, pulled out a bank card, and handed it to the cashier. She inserted it into the payment terminal. A second later, the machine beeped, declined. Julian frowned. That can't be right. The cashier offered him an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. Let me try it one more time." She inserted the card again. Another beep. Declined. Julian reached for the card she handed back to him. This time, he looked at it. A quiet sigh escaped him. "Oh." A faint, embarrassed smile crossed his face. "This is my old card. It expired months ago." He slipped it back into his wallet, then searched for his usual bank card. His smile slowly faded. One pocket, then another. Nothing. That was when it hit him. He had left his active bank card behind at the pharmacy. The cashier looked at him sympathetically. "Do you happen to have another card, sir?" Julian shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't." For a brief moment, the diner fell unusually quiet. "I'm sorry," Julian said softly. "I honestly don't know how this happened." Before the cashier could answer, a gentle voice spoke behind him. "I'll pay for his breakfast." Julian turned. The young teacher who had been grading spelling tests walked over with a warm smile and placed her card on the counter. "It's only breakfast." "You don't even know me," Julian said. She smiled. "I don't have to." The cashier completed the payment and handed Julian his receipt. Grace picked up her bag and quietly returned to her table. Julian stood there for a moment, watching her. For reasons he couldn't explain, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. Julian picked up the coffee Grace had just paid for and walked toward her table. He stopped beside the empty chair. "May I?" Grace looked up from the spelling tests she was grading. A small smile appeared on her face. "That depends," Julian smiled. "On what?" She set her red pen down. "Are you about to spend the next 10 minutes trying to pay me back?" He laughed quietly. "No. I was actually hoping you'd answer one question." She folded the last spelling test and placed it neatly on the stack. "I'm listening." Julian looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Why did you help me?" "You didn't know who I was." "You didn't know if I deserved it." Grace shrugged gently. "I knew enough." He looked puzzled. She smiled. "You looked embarrassed. And you were trying very hard not to let anyone notice." "I've seen that look before." Julian frowned slightly. "You have?" She nodded. "I teach second grade. Children wear brave faces all the time. They pretend they're fine when they aren't. You learn to notice the things people don't say." Her answer caught him off guard. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then he smiled. "I guess I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," Grace replied. "I know. But I'd like to tell you anyway." He wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup. "This morning, I stopped at a pharmacy. There was an elderly woman who couldn't afford her medication. I paid for it and rushed to an important meeting." He shook his head with a quiet laugh. "I was in such a hurry that I left my bank card behind." Grace smiled. "So that's why you looked so confused." Julian nodded. "I kept wondering how a simple cup of coffee had become the hardest thing I'd bought all week." That made Grace laugh. A real laugh. The kind that made Julian laugh too. For the first time that day, neither of them was thinking about missed meetings, declined cards, or the pressure waiting outside the diner. "I'm Grace," she said, holding out her hand. "Grace Miller." Julian took her hand with a warm smile. Julian Mercer. Neither of them realized it then, but what began with a $4 breakfast was quietly becoming the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. For the next 3 days, Julian told himself the coffee was the reason he kept thinking about that little diner. It wasn't. He knew it. On the 4th afternoon, his driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "The office, sir?" Julian looked out the window for a moment before smiling. "No." "The diner." The driver chuckled softly. "I had a feeling you'd say that." 20 minutes later, Julian stepped inside. His eyes instinctively searched the room. Then he saw her. Grace was sitting in the same booth by the window, surrounded by another stack of spelling tests. She looked up as the little bell above the door announced a new customer. The moment she saw Julian, a smile spread across her face. "You came back." Julian smiled. "I was hoping the coffee would be as good as I remembered." Grace laughed. "I think you're giving the coffee too much credit." "Probably." He walked over to her table. "May I?" She nodded toward the empty chair. "I was wondering how long it would take." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You were expecting me?" Grace shrugged with a playful smile. "Not exactly. But you looked like someone who still had a question or two." Julian laughed as he sat down. "You know, I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts. I've spoken in front of thousands of people. But somehow, I was more nervous walking over to this table." Grace looked at him, amused. "Good. That means you're honest." The waitress brought Julian his coffee without asking what he wanted. "The usual?" she asked with a smile. Julian nodded. "Thank you." Grace noticed. "You've already become a regular." "I'm not sure that's a bad thing." For the next hour, they talked about everything except work. Grace told him about the little victories in her classroom. The student who had finally learned to read. The little girl who insisted on sharing half her lunch with a classmate every day. The boy who dreamed of becoming an astronaut, even though he'd never left the neighborhood. Julian listened far more than he spoke. There was something about the way Grace saw the world that made his own seem a little less complicated. And for the first time in a very long time, he found himself wishing the afternoon wouldn't end. Over the next 2 weeks, the little diner quietly became part of Julian's routine. Some days they talked for 20 minutes, some days for an hour. Neither of them noticed how naturally those afternoons had become the best part of their week. One Tuesday morning, Grace was arranging books on a shelf in her classroom when the principal appeared at her door. "There you are," he said with an excited smile. "We've got a very special visitor coming this afternoon." Grace looked up. "Who is it?" "The businessman who's been sponsoring our lunch program and helping pay school fees for so many of our students." Grace smiled. "The anonymous donor?" The principal nodded. "He prefers to stay out of the spotlight, but we finally convinced him to visit the children." I want every teacher in the assembly hall after lunch. Don't be late." The entire school buzzed with excitement for the rest of the morning. The children practiced welcome songs. Teachers decorated the stage with handmade posters. By early afternoon, the assembly hall was filled with eager faces. Grace stood near the back with the other teachers, smiling as her students whispered excitedly to one another. A few moments later, the principal stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome the man whose generosity has quietly changed the lives of so many children in this school." He turned toward the entrance. "Please join me in welcoming Mr. Julian Mercer." Grace's eyes widened. Her heart skipped a beat. She watched as Julian walked onto the stage to warm applause. He looked out across the room, and then his eyes found hers. For a brief moment, they simply smiled at each other. When the applause faded, Julian stepped down from the stage to greet the teachers. As he stopped in front of Grace, she leaned in slightly and whispered with a soft laugh, "So, you're the billionaire?" Julian smiled, almost shyly. "Yes." Grace shook her head, laughing under her breath. "I never saw that coming." "I was hoping you'd get to know me first," Julian replied. She looked at him for a moment before smiling again. "I'm glad I did." For the rest of the afternoon, Grace watched Julian sit on the floor with her students, reading stories, answering questions, and laughing with them as though he had nowhere else in the world to be. It wasn't his success that impressed her. It was how naturally he treated every child as though they mattered. And in that moment, she understood why helping a stranger had come so easily to him. After the school visit, Julian didn't leave right away. While the principal spoke with a few guests, he wandered through the hallways, stopping to admire the children's artwork pinned to the walls. Grace eventually caught up with him. "I didn't know you enjoyed visiting schools this much," Julian smiled. "I don't." Grace looked at him, surprised. "You don't?" "I enjoy visiting this school." She laughed softly. "I think my students are going to be talking about you for weeks." "They're incredible kids." "They are," Grace agreed. "They just need someone to believe in them." Julian nodded. "That's why I started helping." Grace glanced at him. "What made you do it?" For a moment, Julian was quiet. "When I was a boy, there was a teacher who refused to let me give up. My father was always busy building the company. My mother passed away when I was young. But one teacher kept telling me I could become more than people expected." He smiled faintly. "I never forgot her. So when I was finally in a position to help, I promised myself I'd make sure other children got the opportunities I had." Grace's eyes softened. "I think she'd be proud of you." Julian looked at the classrooms around them. "I hope so." Just then, a little boy ran toward Grace. "Miss Miller, my shoe came apart again." Grace knelt without hesitation. "Let me see." The sole had almost completely separated. The little boy looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I tried to be careful." Grace smiled and gently squeezed his shoulder. "You have nothing to be sorry for. We'll figure it out." The boy hurried back to his classmates. Julian had watched the entire exchange without saying a word. On the drive back to his office that evening, he couldn't stop thinking about that little boy. The next morning, before the first school bell rang, several neatly packed boxes arrived at the principal's office. Inside were brand new shoes in every size for every child who might need them. There was no note, no company logo, no cameras. only a small card that read, "Every child deserves to walk into class with confidence." When the principal showed Grace the card, she smiled to herself. She didn't need anyone to tell her who had sent them. Some people measured wealth by what they owned. Julian Mercer measured it by the number of lives he could quietly make a little brighter. A few days after the shoes arrived, Grace found a small envelope waiting on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note. "Would you have dinner with me? No speeches, no business, just two friends getting to know each other. Julian." A smile spread across her face. That evening, Julian picked her up just before sunset. Instead of taking her to one of the city's most expensive restaurants, he drove to a quiet park overlooking a peaceful lake. A simple picnic had already been prepared beneath a large oak tree. Grace looked at him and laughed. "I thought billionaires were supposed to impress people with private chefs and rooftop restaurants." Julian smiled. "I've learned that the best conversations don't need expensive places." They spent hours talking as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. Grace told him stories about her students. Julian shared memories of building his company from long days, sleepless nights, and countless setbacks. For the first time in years, he spoke about his life without anyone asking about profits, investments, or business deals. When the stars began to appear, they walked slowly along the lake. Neither of them seemed in a hurry for the evening to end. Julian finally broke the comfortable silence. "Can I tell you something?" Grace nodded. "Of course." He looked out across the water before speaking. "The morning we met, I thought I had lost my bank card, but I realize now I found something much more valuable." Grace smiled. "What's that?" "A reminder that kindness still exists, that people still help strangers without expecting anything in return." He turned to face her, and that one small act of generosity can change someone's life. Grace looked at him for a long moment. "I almost didn't pay for that breakfast." Julian looked surprised. "You didn't?" She shook her head. "I was tired. I'd had a difficult week. For a second, I told myself someone else would help." She smiled softly. "But then I remembered something my father used to tell me. If you have the chance to be someone's answer to prayer, don't walk away." Julian's eyes filled with admiration. "I'm very glad you listened to him." Grace reached over and gently took his hand. "So am I." As they continued walking beneath the evening sky, both of them knew something had quietly changed. Neither of them had said the words yet, but sometimes love begins long before anyone is brave enough to name it. Several weeks later, the school gymnasium was filled with laughter. Parents, teachers, and children had gathered to celebrate the opening of a brand new learning center, funded entirely through the Julian Mercer Foundation. There were no giant banners with Julian's name, no grand speeches praising his generosity, just children excited about their new library, computers, and classrooms. Grace stood beside him as the ribbon was cut. She looked around at the smiling faces. "You've changed so many lives." Julian smiled gently. "They changed mine first." Grace looked at him. "What do you mean?" He chuckled softly. "If I hadn't forgotten my bank card that morning, I never would have walked into that diner. If I hadn't walked into that diner, I never would have met the woman who reminded me what kindness really looks like." Grace laughed. "I only bought you breakfast." Julian shook his head. "No. You reminded me that generosity isn't measured by how much we give. It's measured by the love behind it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of children laughing echoed through the building. Julian turned toward Grace. His voice was calm, but filled with emotion. "I've built companies. I've achieved goals I once thought were impossible. But none of those things mean as much to me as what we've found together." He gently took both of her hands. "Grace, I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, making sure no child in your classroom ever has to learn on an empty stomach." Tears gathered in Grace's eyes. She smiled through them. "I'd like that very much." She slipped her hand into his. No rings, no elaborate proposal. Just two people who had discovered that the greatest love stories often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. As they walked through the school together, children ran past them laughing, their hopeful voices filling the halls. It was a reminder that kindness has a way of multiplying. One forgotten bank card, one $4 breakfast, one simple decision to help a stranger, and two lives were changed forever. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe one small act of kindness can truly change someone's life, or even lead to a lifetime of love? If you were Grace, would you have paid for a complete stranger's breakfast without knowing who they were? Share your answer in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes kindness can change the world. If you're looking for even more unforgettable billionaire love stories, I've put together a special collection of 5 heartwarming billionaire romance stories that readers have been enjoying. You'll find the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.